Whoa, throwing mama from the train. Welcome to Harbor. That famous scene from the 1980s movies, Throw Mama from the Train, may well be the movie equivalent of what life as a senior would be like in a Romney presidency. The Ryan budget plan, which Romney supports, would decimate Medicare. A point driven home with some exaggeration by this famous, ad. Let's listen to this ad. Strong images there, wouldn't you say? Well, today in Florida, President Obama opened a new front in his fight against Romney, making sure voters know Romney would end Medicare as we know it, basically that he'd throw mama for the train. But let's listen. This is serious business. It's not just comedy here. Romney's plan is the Ryan plan. The Ryan plan gets rid of Medicare and replaces it with some kind of a voucher program, which could put you in a precarious position if you have health needs. Let's listen.
He plans to roll back health care reform, forcing more than 200,000 Floridians to pay more for their prescription drugs. He plans to turn Medicare into a voucher program. So if that voucher isn't worth enough to buy the health insurance that's on the market, you're out of luck. You're on your own. One independent, nonpartisan study found that seniors would have to pay nearly $6,400 more for Medicare than they do today.
Well, Dee Dee Myers is former White House press secretary to President Bill Clinton and a contributing editor of Vanity Fair. Eugene Robinson's a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist for the Washington Post and an MSNBC political analyst. By the way, Eugene, if I got a Pulitzer Prize, I'd never stop saying it forever. Anyway, thank you for, and I don't think I'm going to get one, obviously. But let's talk about this. Gene, let's get through the analysis here. It seems like it's fair. It's tough. The advertising over the top, you might argue, but it's fair in this sense. Romney has bought into the Ryan plan. Ryan gets lots of kudos for guts, but his plan does do what the president says it would do, right?
Well, yeah, it does. It would turn Medicare into a voucher program. It is fair to say, in my view, that it would end Medicare as we know it. It would create something else that would be called Medicare, but it wouldn't be the program we know. And so this is pretty much a fundamental question, I think, whether you make Medicare into a voucher program or you keep it as an entitlement. And I believe the polls show that most people want to keep it the way it is. They don't want it to be a voucher program. It is perfectly fair game.
Gene, you and I know people on Medicare, our parents, aunts and uncles, and some of our older brothers. Yeah. They love it because for the first time in their life, they get something for all the work they did. Dee Dee, let me ask you about this. Everybody says cut the budget. Cut spending. And it's a good idea. We have a big deficit. Or how about just cutting the deficit through different taxation policies? But the minute you get to the reality of these cuts, and here we are, the president, you like the Ryan guts? You like him cutting things? Well, here's what he's cutting. Medicare. Go ahead and explain it, defend it. I think that's the problem that Romney's going to have between now and November.
Right, and the broader question that you just raised is we have a deficit, we have a debt. These have become problematic, and everybody agrees with that. And then you get into the details of whose ox are you going to gore and whose are you going to protect in order to do something about that. Are you going to go after the most vulnerable, as the Ryan budget does? It cuts not only Medicare, but also things like education and other important spending that helps the most vulnerable. Or are you going to provide tax cuts for the rich? Or are you going to preserve some of those programs in order to try to move toward a society where everybody has an equal shot and everybody has a chance? That's not a free, they're going to say that, the president's trying to scare people, but this isn't just an important issue. It's central to the philosophical differences, the philosophical divide that separates Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. So you're going to hear a lot about it. And on top of that, of course, the research shows that it's pretty effective with seniors.
Well, let me ask you about the realities here. Again, Gene, it's good to talk the fact you're going to be a different kind of president than Obama. And then you have to explain what that means. You're not just a relief pitcher coming in a difficult part of the game. You're coming in with a totally different approach. It seems to me if he's going to cut taxes further for corporations, he's going to keep the Bush tax cuts for the wealthy all the way through and make them permanent. He has to come up with some cuts on the other side, or he's going to increase the deficits. And it looks like these are the cuts. This is what's going to pay for the extension of the Bush tax cuts and the corporate tax cuts.
Absolutely. Mitt Romney has not spelled out precisely what he would cut. When he talks about reforming the tax code, he hasn't spelled out what loopholes he would close. For example, you want to close, you want to start taxing health benefits. Do you want to end the mortgage interest deduction? That sort of those are the big things that you could do with the tax code that would bring in more money. So you got to be specific, and I agree that you can't run all the way to the White House by just saying I'm gonna do it right without spelling out how you're going to do it.
Yeah, well, let's take a look at these. Go ahead, Didi.
I was going to add that it's also important to note that the Ryan budget doesn't balance the budget any time in the foreseeable future. In fact, it adds hundreds of billions of dollars of additional debt.
Yeah, well, let's take a look at these new polls. Now, these are really tricky. It's why I keep saying to myself, you can't predict this election. Here's the New York Times and CBS News poll. We get the Fox News and National Public Radio poll even. And they show a Romney actually with a margin of error race here, 47-46 for Romney. According to Times, CBS, 45-41 Romney. Actually, Obama. According to the Fox poll, 47-45 Obama. Well, you know, what do you make of these, Gene, when you put them all together? I see nothing but within the margin of error here. On all of them.
That's certainly what these polls show. And look, if you take the run of the last few months' worth of polls, it's either a margin of error race or Obama is slightly ahead. I mean, that's what the polls tend to say, and I think that's probably right. And it could be that way all the way to Election Day, or events might cause it to break one way or the other. But right now, you'd have to say it's a close race.
So what happens if we don't have a war with Iran, or Israel doesn't have a war we get involved with Iran, Europe doesn't come apart, and the unemployment rate stays about where it is, and the growth rate stays about where it is? Are we looking at an election night like this, which is basically within the margin of error? In other words, another hell to pay 2000 when we wait all night and still have a disputed election. Pick it up, Didi. That's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at an election where either guy wins so narrowly that we'll be screeching for the rest of our lives about the Pennsylvania voter ID requirement, right, where all these old people had to go have high cards. Suppose the election turns on one state, like it did last in Ohio in 2004, and it's because of some new voter ID law that made it impossible for older people to get to the polls. Where are we at then?
Yeah, that's entirely possible. It's also possible that there'll be some intervening event less than, say, war with Iran or something, that will begin to define these things. And sometimes there's a cumulative drip, drip, drip. I mean, one of the things people were saying about the polls today was it showed that, the Obama attacks on Bain weren't really landing. They weren't really changing the dynamic of the race. And the truth is, it's really too soon to say what the cumulative effect of the arguments, not just the specifics of the Bain, but the arguments more broadly about what does it say about Romney's priorities and his character. They in 2004, the Bush people or their agents who weren't working for the Bush people started the swiftboat attacks in May, and John Kerry led during the entire run of those ads, which was May through the end of August. You didn't start to see his favorables kind of shrink until after that, but the cumulative damage from those ads was very clear. So, you don't know what the cumulative effect of the tax on Romney or, vice versa, the attacks on, if the economy remains bad and people just decide they've had it, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah,
but,
do you believe, excuse me, we got to go. Didi, do you believe they're now accusing the Democrats of swift boating? They're using the word. They don't, are being Nixonian with their enemies list. They have no irony, these people. Anyway, thank you, Didi. Have a nice weekend. Thank you, Eugene Robinson.